And welcome back. We're talking about side hustles on today's checklist.
The gig economy is another term you hear. It's just fancy language for it's a side hustle.
I'm about to give you 3 lazy side hustles that anyone can start doing.
From laid off to $20,000 a month.
And then I'm going to end with some side hustles that may take a little bit of time, but definitely the juice is worth the squeeze.
Do not interpret anything I'm about to say as disrespectful to all the hustlers out there. It's no shade to the contractor, to the freelancer, to the part-timer and contingent worker, to the temp, subcontractor, sole proprietor, the platform gig worker. I mean, look at UNFTR. Even though this is a money-losing enterprise, it's still a side hustle. My day job pays for most of this, but I'm in this. I'm a hustler. So just know that through everything that I'm about to say about this culture, I see you. UNFTR. When we talk about work in America, we're really talking about mythology. Not the mythology of the noble laborer, but the more insidious mythology of the hustler, the entrepreneur, the self-made individual who pulls themselves up by their bootstraps and transforms grit into gold. Over the past several months, we've talked a lot about the labor participation rate in this country as an example. So while economists like to quote prime-age labor participation, which counts the productive workforce between the ages of 25 and 54, the reality is that only 62% of Americans over the age of 18 are gainfully employed in this economy. So that means that more than 1 in 3 adults, people who could and often want to work, are sitting on the sidelines. We've built a system that glorifies precarity and calls it freedom. We've taken the legitimate desire for autonomy and meaningful work and twisted it into a culture that demands self-exploitation. This is the essence of hustle culture, the transformation of labor from a collective endeavor deserving of protection and dignity into an individual performance where success or failure rests solely on the worker's shoulders. There is remarkable consensus between both major parties on the question of work. Democrats and Republicans may disagree on the margins, on tax rates and regulatory frameworks, but they share a fundamental belief in entrepreneurship and self-reliance over robust worker protections and guarantees. And this consensus runs so deep that when President Biden became the first sitting president in modern American history to join striking workers on a picket line, walking with UAW members in Michigan during their 2023 strike, it was treated as a radical departure from presidential norms. And in so many ways, it was. For decades, American presidents have positioned themselves as neutral arbiters in labor disputes, or more often, defenders of business interests wrapped in the language of economic growth and competitiveness. But even Biden's historic gesture came with contradictions. While he stood with auto workers, his administration also intervened to end the railroad workers' strike in 2022, imposing a congressional resolution that gave workers far less than they were demanding. And the message was clear. Worker solidarity is acceptable when politically convenient and economically contained, but the broader system of prioritizing business interests over worker welfare remains wholly intact. Both parties have bought into the idea that the solution to economic insecurity isn't stronger collective bargaining. It's not universal social programs or redistributive policies. It's creating more entrepreneurs, more small business owners, more people who can bootstrap their way to prosperity. And the problem with this approach isn't that entrepreneurship is inherently bad. The problem is it's been deployed as a substitute for the hard work of building an economy that provides security and dignity for all. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. This opening salvo from the Communist Manifesto has come to define entire schools of thought. So to suggest that there's a single turning point in the history of labor is folly. But in the modern era, if we're to point to an American inflection, it would have to be the 80s and 90s, where the foundations of the modern American labor market were laid. In so many ways, Ronald Reagan's presidency marked the beginning of a sustained assault on organized labor that transformed not just the legal landscape of work, but the cultural understanding of what workers deserve and what employers owe them. The most symbolic moment came in 1981, when Reagan fired more than 11,000 air traffic controllers who'd gone on strike for better working conditions and pay. This wasn't just about breaking one union. It was about sending a message to the entire labor movement that the federal government would no longer serve as even a nominal ally to organized labor. And predictably, private sector employers began adopting increasingly aggressive anti-union tactics, knowing that they had the implicit support of the federal government. Union membership, which had peaked around 35% of the workforce in the 50s, began a precipitous decline. By 1990, it had fallen to 16%, and today it hovers around 10%, a number that would have been unthinkable to a generation of workers who built the American middle class in the post-war era. But the Reagan Revolution wasn't just about union busting. It was about reorienting the relationship between workers and the broader economy. The idea that work should provide not just wages, but security through pensions and healthcare and stability was systematically dismantled in favor of a model that transferred risk from employers to workers. But if Reagan began the assault on worker power, it was Bill Clinton and the New Democrats who completed it by co-opting the language of progressivism to advance policies that further undermined collective worker power. The Clinton administration's embrace of entrepreneurship and small business development wasn't just economic policy. It was a form of political triangulation that allowed Democrats to sound pro-worker while actually advancing policies that individualized economic risk. And this was especially devastating in parts of the country that lacked the economic density to support widespread entrepreneurship. I mean, rural America and post-industrial cities were told that their salvation lay in becoming more entrepreneurial, in attracting small businesses and startups. But entrepreneurship requires customers and capital and infrastructure, precisely the things that these communities lacked after decades of deindustrialization and capital flight. A laid-off steel worker in Ohio was told to become a small business owner, as if the fundamental problem was a lack of entrepreneurial spirit rather than a systematic abandonment of an industrial base that had supported entire communities. This entrepreneurship trap has only intensified in recent decades. The gig economy, with its promise of flexibility and autonomy, is really just the latest iteration of this decades-old project of transferring economic risk from employers to workers while calling it empowerment. The mythology of rugged individualism isn't just an economic theory. It's a form of identity that shapes how Americans understand themselves and their relationship to work. We're all cowboys. We all want to be entrepreneurs. We celebrate Steve Jobs and not Norma Ray. Our cultural heroes are the founders and innovators, not the people who actually build and maintain the infrastructure of daily life. It's a cultural project that serves capital interests by making collective action seem downright un-American. I mean, think about how we talk about economic success and failure. When someone succeeds, we attribute it to their hard work and their gusto, their innovation and individual merit. But when somebody fails, we assume they just didn't work hard enough. They didn't adapt quickly enough. They didn't hustle enough. The psychological toll of this framework is enormous. Workers not just dealing with economic insecurity, but dealing with the constant message that their insecurity is their own fault. So if you're struggling financially, it's because you haven't found the right side hustle. Maybe you haven't developed the right skills. You haven't embraced the entrepreneurial mindset that supposedly separates winners from losers. So to understand why hustle culture has become so prevalent, we have to understand the greater shift in the broader economy over the last several decades. See, the decline in union density and worker protections is related to the shift away from a manufacturing economy to a service economy and increasingly a financialization phase of the economy as well. As economist Giovanni Arrighi described in his analysis of capitalist cycles, financialization is the last stage of hegemonic decline, where profits are increasingly extracted through financial manipulation rather than productive investment. So, in the American context, this has meant the systematic hollowing out of the industries where workers had the most leverage, like manufacturing or transportation, and their replacement with service industries where workers are more isolated and they're harder to organize. Like a factory worker has a very clear relationship to the productive process. They can see exactly how their labor creates value. When they withdraw their labor, production stops, and the impact is very visible and it's immediate. But a service worker, especially in the gig economy, has a much more attenuated relationship to value creation. Their individual contribution feels replaceable, their leverage minimal. And the atomization of work has been accelerated by technology platforms that promise to connect individual workers directly to customers while actually inserting themselves as intermediaries who capture most of the value. I mean, the Uber driver owns the car, but doesn't control the app that determines their income. The DoorDash delivery worker sets their own schedule, but has no say in the algorithms that determine which orders they receive. This is the techno-feudalism that Yanis Varoufakis describes. We also have the difficulty in measuring economic precarity. So, like, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has had a long-standing internal disagreement and struggle about how to even define and measure gig work. Different surveys use different terminologies, like platform workers, independent contractors, freelancers, 1099 workers. So it all makes it difficult to kind of get a clear picture of how many Americans are trapped in these precarious arrangements. But what we do know is pretty telling. According to Upwork, 38% of workers engaged in freelance work in some capacity in 2023, representing 64 million people. And that's up from 34% in 2014. ADP data shows that from 2010 to 2019, the share of 1099 workers and short-term W-2 workers grew from 14% to 16%. MBO Partners reported that 72 million adults participated in independent arrangements in 2024, and that represents about 43% of the workforce. But these numbers even still don't capture the full scope of work precarity. A Harvard study of gig workers in 2020 revealed that 1 in 7 gig workers earned less than the federal minimum wage on an hourly basis. 3 out of every 5 gig workers lost earnings because of technical difficulties clocking in and out. 1 in 5 gig workers went hungry, and 30% used SNAP benefits within a month of the survey, twice the rate of traditional service sector workers. This is the reality behind the entrepreneurship mythology. It's workers taking on all the risks of business ownership while receiving none of the protections or benefits of traditional employment. And as if the existing pressures on workers weren't enough, the rapid development of artificial intelligence threatens to accelerate the displacement and devaluation of human labor. And people say all the time, oh, it's just puff and smoke, and it's not as good as everybody says it's going to be, but I'm here to tell you that it is changing everything already. I mean, they're designed to eliminate layers of the workforce, and we're seeing it. Designed to reduce labor costs. It's happening. To minimize the human element in production and service delivery. That's been happening for a long time. But the irony is that this technological displacement is happening at exactly the moment when workers have the least collective power to respond to it. So in previous eras of technological change, like the Industrial Revolution, the mechanization of agriculture, the computerization of manufacturing even, workers had stronger unions and more political leverage to demand retraining, social support, and a share of the productivity gains. But today, workers are all told that the solution to AI displacement is just more entrepreneurship, more self-investment, more personal responsibility to stay relevant. So they're told to start a side hustle and embrace the gig economy. And of course, none of this is new. The tension between workers and employers, between those who own the means of production and those who sell their labor, has been the defining conflict of capitalist economies since their inception. In earlier eras of American labor organizing, though, the conflict was way more explicit, like the use of Pinkerton detectives to break strikes, for example. That wasn't hidden or even denied by anybody. The Pinkertons weren't just private security, by the way, they were private armies used by corporations to intimidate and surveil, to attack workers who dared to organize. I mean, people died. The Homestead Strike of 1892, the Pullman Strike of 1894, countless battles between miners and company guards. These were literal wars over the fundamental question of worker power. But even within the labor movement itself, there were profound disagreements about strategy and goals. At the turn of the 20th century, upstart political movements were trying to determine the future of work in America. And there was a split between socialists like Eugene Debs and union leaders like Samuel Gompers, which reflected a deeper tension. Should workers seek accommodation within the capitalist system, or should they try to transform it? Now, the socialists argued for worker ownership over the means of production, for democratic control of the economy, for the elimination of the employer class altogether. But the more moderate union leaders just argued for better wages, shorter hours, and improved working conditions within the existing system. Now, this split ultimately led to the marginalization of socialist voices within organized labor, and the unions did choose accommodation over transformation, but they won a lot of things along the way. But in doing so, they accepted the fundamental premise that some people would just own the means of production and everybody else would sell their labor. And the result of this accommodation is the system that we have today. An economy explicitly designed to prioritize shareholder returns over worker welfare. The doctrine of shareholder primacy, thank you Milton Friedman, which holds that corporations exist primarily to maximize returns to shareholders, became dominant in American business schools and boardrooms in the 70s and 80s. Thank you, Lewis Powell. And under this framework, worker wages became a cost to be minimized rather than an investment in social stability. Benefits became inefficiencies to be eliminated rather than shared investments in worker welfare. And the contrast with other economic models couldn't be starker. We have current examples like the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain. I mean, these worker-owned enterprises have created thousands of jobs, generated billions in revenue, and maintained a commitment to democratic decision-making and equitable profit sharing for more than 6 decades. But our financial system is designed to channel capital toward investor-owned enterprise, not worker cooperatives. Our legal framework makes it so complicated and really expensive to establish cooperative structures. And our cultural mythology celebrates individual ownership over collective ownership. And it seems like any steps that we took toward worker-centric attitudes under Biden, celebrating figures like Lena Khan or Christian Smalls and Sean Fain, have all but faded. The hope that we might someday pass the PRO Act, which would represent the most significant expansion of worker rights since the 30s, all but lost. Donald Trump is moving to dismantle not just organized labor, but the entire federal agency infrastructure of the United States. So this means that future Democratic administrations won't be building on the modest progress of the Biden era. They'll be starting over. When we pick ourselves up from the ashes of the coming Trump depression, it's incumbent upon the people to put forward the plans for future leaders. We've articulated policies on UNFTR before, such as tax advantages and low interest rate federal loans to help employees convert for-profit enterprises to cooperatives, establishing a civilian labor corps to perform much of the work that our society needs, like caring for children and elders, maintaining infrastructure, protecting the environment, creating art and culture. Needs that don't fit neatly into profit-maximizing framework of capitalist enterprises and are therefore non-competitive with these interests and non-inflationary in nature. Instead of forcing this work into gig economy platforms or leaving it underfunded in the public sector, civilian labor corps workers would be employed directly by democratic institutions with full benefits and job security to do work that makes communities stronger and more resilient. This kind of transformation would require not just policy changes, but cultural changes as well. So we have to move away from the mythology of individual entrepreneurship toward an understanding of work as inherently collaborative and social. The alternative isn't to abandon the legitimate desire for meaningful, autonomous work. The alternative is to create economic institutions that provide security and dignity for all workers while still allowing for creativity, innovation, and genuine entrepreneurship within a framework of democratic ownership and control. This means strong unions, robust social programs, and aggressive regulation of capital in the short term. But in the long run, it means something more fundamental. A society where the fruits of collective labor are shared collectively, where work serves human needs rather than profit maximization, and where every person's contribution to the common good is valued and rewarded. Imagine coalescing the individual power of all those who hustle and all those who grind and pouring it into building a collectivist framework. That's what this side hustle is all about. How about yours? Here endeth the lesson. Thank you for taking the time to hang with me again today. And don't forget, we have a ton of free resources on our website, from a directory of progressive resources to action plans to promote the 5 non-negotiables of the left, like a civilian labor corps. And while you're there, make sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter as well. And before you go, hit that subscribe button. And thank you to all the members who promote this side hustle.
This is the story of a political pundit who looked at the world around him and just said, fuck it. Gives the middle finger to authority and says, kiss my ass. But instead of a revolution, he started a podcast. Just what the world needs. Started a podcast. Another basic white guy who started a podcast. But it's fun because he curses all through the podcast.